Today, technology gives us access to more entertainment options than we've ever had before. From Netflix to Facebook to Xbox Live, the average person can have incredibly immersive entertainment experiences without ever having to get off of their couch. And even though these platforms cost billions of dollars to build and they cost billions of dollars to maintain, many of them are made available to us 100% for free. So how can that be? And is this something that we should worry about? So to understand the answer to this question, it pays first to think about how pervasive technology has become in our lives. Today, 89% of Americans use the internet, 68% of us have a Facebook account, and among younger people, it's 95%, and 77% of us have smartphones, about double the number just 5 years ago. A huge point of engagement with technology is video games. 97% of boys and 92% of girls play at least some kind of video games, and most of them play every day. But video games are not just for kids. 2/3 of US households have at least one person who games regularly, and many of them are adults. As an example, that's my Xbox Live profile. That's me, I'm sure that's obvious. That number at the bottom is my gamer score, and my gamer score is an expression of my cumulative performance across all the games that I play on Xbox Live. So it was 40,000 when I took this. I played some games last night. It's a little bit higher now. When I did the research for this presentation, I found out that the average Xbox Live member has a gamer score of 11,000, which was a little horrifying. And I do have to play some video games for my job, to be fair, but at the same time, you can see that gaming is a huge source of entertainment, not just for kids, but also for grown-ups. Now, the biggest category of games, the fastest growing category right now is a category called free-to-play, which is where you download the game for free, and then you have the option to buy more content to use after you've started playing. So 85% of people who play video games play at least some free-to-play games. And the net impact of all of this is that a growing number of us are really never disconnected from technology. So in 2018, 25% of all Americans and 45% of teens say that they're doing something on the internet almost constantly. Among teens, that's almost twice as high as just 3 years ago. So that's a look at how pervasive technology has become, but what is it that makes it so engaging? Why do we get so hooked on it? And the short answer is that these experiences are designed to be that way. So this is a gentleman named B.F. Skinner who was a behavioral psychologist at Harvard, and he pioneered lots of theories about what drives human behavior and how that behavior can be manipulated using rewards. One of his most important theories, at least for this conversation, is something called variable ratio reinforcement. Variable ratio reinforcement explains a lot of why we get so hooked on entertainment technology. This picture is something that he developed called a Skinner box. A Skinner box is a box, and inside the box there's a rat. There's a lever that the rat can push, and then there's a chute that delivers food. And so he used this to experiment on how an animal's behavior can be changed using different methods of introducing rewards. And he tested 3 different methods. One's called continuous reinforcement, and that's where every time the rat pushes the lever, he gets food. The second one is called fixed ratio reinforcement, and that one is where the rat, every certain number of times that the rat pushes the lever, say 5 times, the food appears, and that interval remains the same every time. And then the last one's variable ratio reinforcement, where the rat pushes the lever and the food appears, but the number of times he has to push it each time is different. So the reward is delivered unpredictably. Now, for each of these 3, he measured 2 things about the rat's behavior. He measured the response rate, which is how fast does the rat push the lever, and then he measured the extinction rate, which is how fast does the rat get bored and stop pushing. With continuous reinforcement, where the rat gets food every time, the activity level is slow, and the extinction rate is fast. He gets bored quickly. With fixed ratio, the activity level is a little bit faster, and the behavior persists a little bit longer. But with variable ratio reinforcement, the activity is the fastest, and the extinction rate is the slowest. The rat keeps pushing for the longest period of time. So in other words, unpredictable rewards have a much bigger impact on behavior than predictable ones do. And these principles apply to people the same way that they apply to rats. In fact, scientists have done experiments to show that variable rewards delivered on an unpredictable basis create higher levels of activity in dopamine cells than predictable rewards do. And higher levels of dopamine are often associated with compulsive behavior like drug abuse. So where do we see variable ratio reinforcement in entertainment today? One place that we see it is in gambling, especially in things like slot machines and scratch tickets. We see it in social media, where likes and notifications get delivered to us on an unpredictable basis and keep us engaged. And we also see it in video games, where variable ratio reinforcement is a central theme of how many games are designed. And in fact, it's even something that's taught in game design school. So we've talked about variable ratio reinforcement as something that makes entertainment more entertaining, but as B.F. Skinner showed us, it also creates opportunities for behavior to be manipulated. So let's tie this back to a real-life example of entertainment technology. How many people here play or know someone who plays a game called Fortnite? So quite a few people. For anybody who's not familiar with it, Fortnite is a free-to-play game like I talked about that was introduced about a year ago. And since then, it's become not just a gaming industry phenomenon, but it's really a cultural phenomenon. So the game was introduced in July of 2017, and about a month later, it had 1 million players. Just under a year after that, in June of this year, it had 127 million players. Now, as I mentioned, the game itself is free to play, but once you download it, you can buy add-on content for your character. You can buy a ton of outfits, helmets, costumes. You can even buy emotes, which are these gestures that your character will make in the game and other characters can see it. None of these things has any impact on your ability to play or on whether or not you win or perform well in the game. They're purely cosmetic. But even so, in February of this year, Fortnite players spent $126 million on this add-on content. In April, 2 months later, that was up to almost $300 million. $300 million in 1 month. To give you an idea of, I mean, it sounds like a lot of money anyway, but even just to give you an idea, even in entertainment perspectives, how much that is, another entertainment property that came out in April was Marvel Avengers Infinity War, the movie. That was a monster movie. In fact, it had the biggest opening gross weekend of any movie in the history of movies, and here's how much it made. So as you can see, people are spending a ton of money on these games. But it's interesting to look at who is spending this money. In a recent study among Fortnite players, researchers found that the median spend among people who had spent anything in the game was $40, but the average spend was $85. And that means that the spending distribution looks like this chart, where there's a small number of players generating most of the revenue and a lot more players who are only spending a little bit or not spending anything at all. And that's not unusual. In fact, free-to-play games are designed assuming that a very small percentage of players, about anywhere from 5% or less, are going to invest tremendous amount of time in the game and spend money. There's a term for them. They call them whales, and that's the same term, interestingly, that's used in the casino industries for the heavy players. But those whales, that 2 to 3% of players, are the ones that generate almost all of the revenue for games like these. And as you can imagine, that level of engagement for some people comes at the expense of other things in life. In November 2017, the gaming blog Kotaku published an interview with a teenager who had spent $13,500 on a set of free-to-play games. In June of this year, a librarian in Utah pled guilty to embezzlement after he spent $89,000 of city money on a free game called Game of War. It's a really good game, but still. And one more data point from those Fortnite players. Among the respondents in that study who were students, 35% of them said they had skipped school at least once to play Fortnite. But video games are not the only form of technology, of entertainment that we get for free because of technology. Another big one is social media. Just by a show of hands, how many people in here have a Facebook or a Twitter or an Instagram account, anything like that? So just about everybody. How many of you remember clicking I accept at the bottom of a privacy policy when you first signed up for one of those? Still, well, some people. Now, here's the hard question. How many of you who did read that or remember what it says? A full-on zero. All right. If you don't remember, you're not alone. This chart shows the number of words in the privacy policies of some common online platforms. This purple bar shows how many words are in the U.S. Constitution. Now, the average person can read about 200 words per minute, and the average person has more than one of these social media platforms. So it's not surprising that even though almost all of us use social media, very, very few of us understand the agreement that we've entered into by using these platforms, and that agreement is not at all an insignificant one. Let's use Facebook as an example. Depending on how much you use it and how complete your profile is, you have agreed to share a lot of information about yourself with Facebook. They know who you are, your age, your gender, where you live. They know your behavior online, so your likes and your posts on Facebook, and they might know about activity on other accounts that you've linked to your Facebook account. They know who are the people that you know and that you communicate with. And finally, they have really specific information on how to find you, how to talk to you, either your email address, maybe your phone number, and your name. But it might surprise you that in some cases, they might even know what motivates you, maybe even better than you know this yourself. How many people here have ever filled out a personality test in a survey on Facebook? Some people have. Those personality tests, and personality tests like that, I should say, have been used by psychologists for years to classify people attitudinally. So classify them based on things: are you an introvert or an extrovert? How well do you get along with other people? How compassionate are you? How open or closed are you to new experiences? Things like that. Now, when all of this information gets stored in one place, it can be combined to create a profile of you that is incredibly complete and incredibly powerful. The information about who you are, where you are, how to reach you, and then finally, what are the things that you care about? What are the issues and the emotions and the imagery that are going to be the most likely for you to find compelling and to influence your behavior? So this is more targetable and more precise than any form of advertising that's ever existed before. And is this a bad thing? Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be. And in fact, in some cases, it can even be helpful. One example of a company that uses these profiles, a cosmetics company, created multiple campaigns for the same product with different messaging based on how women feel about their appearance. So one campaign with messaging for women who are shy, one campaign with messaging for women who are confident, et cetera. This is a really good way to sell more cosmetics, but it also means that consumers are seeing advertising that's relevant to them. And if you have to see advertising anyway, why not see some advertising that you're going to care about? These profiles are also used by political campaigns to advertise to voters. So they can target people very specifically based on all the things we just talked about. Your education level, what kind of a job you have. They can target people in specific states or even specific zip codes within states. And then they can build the campaigns around the messaging that the issues that these people are going to have the strongest feelings about. So the things that are most likely, for example, to create a sense of urgency about getting out to vote, or the things that are most likely to make people favor one candidate over another. So the value to advertisers here is obvious, it's huge, but the value to consumers is maybe not as clear as in the other example I used. So what does this mean? What should you do about it? And good news, the first thing you should do is enjoy it. We're in a golden age of entertainment right now. There's never been more entertainment to choose from. It's never been easier to get access to, and by almost any measure, it's never been more fun. So those are all really good things, and we should enjoy them. But it's important to remember that these companies are not charities. On the contrary, they're throwing off profits the likes of which the world has never seen before. And in many cases, their ability to generate these profits depends on two things. One is their ability to influence your behavior, and the other is their ability to gather your data. So just to give you an example of how important that is, in May of this year, new online privacy rules were rolled out called the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR. Some folks might have heard of that. These new rules place just some limits on the ability of online companies to use data from their users. But even so, they had such a cooling effect on the growth of Facebook's advertising business that in July, when they reported their numbers, Facebook stock lost $120 billion of market value in one day. That's the biggest one-day drop in the history of the stock market. So a good rule of thumb is that if you're having a valuable experience online and nobody is asking you to pay for it, you're probably not the customer, you're probably the product. And in many cases, that might be just fine. Things like Fortnite and Facebook, Fortnite especially, is a blast. And a lot of consumers would be happy to give up some information about themselves to get access to that game for free. But it's important to remember that the potential exists for that data to be used in ways that you didn't expect. And we're all using these platforms so much now, this technology is so pervasive that you can't afford to be ignorant about your role in these transactions. So learn about the businesses that you're working with, be aware of the kinds of data that you're sharing, and that's the way that you can be sure that the price of free entertainment is not more than you're willing to pay. Thank you.